So Rory McEntee is an author, scholar, educator, and contemplative activist. As a close friend and mentee of the late brother Wayne Teasdale, who was a brain, Rory helped to found the Interspiritual movement, traveling and participating in dialogues with world spiritual leaders, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Pope Francis. Rory served as administrator for the Snowmass Interspiritual Dialogues, a 30-year project convened by Father Thomas Keating, engaging contemplative leaders from multiple faiths in intimate dialogue and contemplative practice. As a leader in the new monastic movement, Rory is a co-founder and co-director of the Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which supports various projects in interspirituality and new monasticism, including the Future of Religion and Interspirituality Dialogues, Heartfire Festivals, the Thomas Keating Interspiritual Seminars with Charis Interspiritual and Charis Interspiritual Formation Program. And he is defending his dissertation next week, so the soon-to-be Dr. McEntee. And Rory, we're just so happy to have you in this space. I just was with Rory a couple of weeks ago in Vermont during the Thomas Keating Interspiritual Seminars. So I'm still kind of reeling from some of that and processing all the fabulous conversations that we had. So great to have you here and for you to get to know some of the folks that we know and introduce you to some of them and meet some new folks. So we have a first question, and it does relate to your work with Brother Wayne Teasdale, and we'd love to hear about your journey with him. How has it shaped you and your views? Maybe, how does it continue to shape you and your views and kind of extend beyond perhaps what you learned while he was living and into the continued presence of him in your life and in our lives now?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for just inviting me here and for all of you coming and offering this space. It's wonderful to be with all of you. And had just a wonderful time with Jeanette and others a couple weeks ago in Vermont. It was really lovely. So I'm just really happy to be here and really grateful. And so the journey with Brother Wayne, is obviously a substantial one for me. I identify as interspiritual, and he coined the term back in his 1999 book, The Mystic Heart. And I met Brother Wayne after I just graduated college for the first time. So this was in 1999, and he did a joint session on the Mystic Heart with the religion professor I became very close with at Lake Forest College, Ron Miller. And following that, so I met Wayne there, and there was a definite connection. And then a group of us went to the Parliament of World Religions in South Africa in 1999, and Brother Wayne was also there. And we were staying at the same hotel, and it was kind of a group of college kids. I took my mom with me, who had never been out of the country, and our professor Ron came with us. And at the end of the night, we always found ourselves down at the bar in the hotel having White Russians, and Wayne would always end the day hanging out with all of us. And so throughout the week, we got to be close, and it seemed like the beginnings of a kind of teacher-student relationship. And so after traveling back, Wayne lived in Chicago and I lived in Chicago at the time. And I ended up starting to spend a lot of time with him. And so that last 5 years, Wayne passed away in 2004. We were very close. I gave up some other schooling to go work as a waiter in Chicago and basically hang out with this very different monk, Catholic monk, who had his own little one-bedroom hermitage in Hyde Park on the south side of Chicago. Taught at DePaul sometimes and at Catholic Theological Union, but was really a kind of renegade hermit monk living in a city. And he wrote a wonderful book called A Monk in the World, I really recommend that book. It's, from what I know, Wayne, that really captures who he was in his life. He was passionate about issues of justice, particularly for the Tibetan people, which was a big deal for him, and he tried to work hard on that. But he was just a beautiful person. You know, I mean, he had had a very rough childhood. His mom, uh, uh, basically, his dad had left. He never knew him. And then his mom, when he was maybe 3 or 4, married another man who said, "You have to pick me or your child." And so she dropped him off with his uncle. And he was raised by his uncle. You know, said he felt he had a dark night all through his teenage years, never really had friends, never dated. He was kind of a mystic from the beginning and didn't fit in. Um, and so you see, I think sometimes some of the suffering of our lives that becomes kind of this fertile ground for spiritual growth and for an opening of a heart, which Wayne had for everyone in his life. And so he was raised by his uncle, and then met Thomas Keating when he was maybe 17 or 18. And Thomas Keating became his spiritual father. And then he also became very close with Bede Griffiths, who was a Christian sannyasi and started an ashram in India and eventually initiated Wayne as a Christian sannyasi. So he was a Catholic monk who wore the orange robe of a Hindu sannyasi, and then had these great teachers. And he also became very close with the Dalai Lama, which is how I originally was able to meet him, that Wayne considered as a close teacher. And so I tell this kind of background of Wayne's story because, you know, what I was sort of baptized into the spiritual journey by him, you know, all of that was present. I think, you know, we bring all these threads of our lives into our spiritual journey, and ultimately what we do with them and how we transform them is actually what we have to offer other people. It may come through, you know, we may use words through our studies or through our traditions, but ultimately it's ourselves that we're offering each other. And I think that was something that Wayne taught me very deeply. And so under his spiritual direction, you know, I began to practice and really gain a daily discipline practice, which was really important. Um, but this inner spiritual element where it was really about humility and growth and practice and love, and it didn't matter what tradition you were in, and you could receive teachings and benefit from people from all different traditions. And Wayne really embodied that and then passed that on to me, so that I inherited some of his teachers like Thomas Keating and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and became kind of a mix of it all. And so, and Wayne always taught me that doesn't get you away from any of the aspects of a spiritual journey. And the knowledge in our traditions are so helpful for those, and sometimes descriptions of practices, things to watch out for on the journey. Stages like dark nights can be so helpful, but it all gets pooled into your own transformative journey. And that can happen in many ways and always happens in a unique way for all of us. And so I've really taken that with me. And Wayne has, you know, always still a very present to me. You know, when he passed away in 2004, it's kind of funny, this word interspiritual, no one really knew it. Like it wasn't, and I remember reading it, I was with him, you know, and I, in his book for it, I was like, what is this funny word? And I didn't get it. I was like, we're already doing this. Why do you have to write about it? Because I was just like with him, you know, and it didn't seem radical. It didn't seem new. It didn't seem, but then all of a sudden now, I mean, by 2010, so 6 years later, and now however many years later it's been, the word is just kind of everywhere. So I think Brother Wayne has been doing a lot of work on the other side, spreading it, and hopefully with the support of the divine and life itself, that feels there's something in it that's speaking to a yearning, that's blossoming in our times, and grows a lot out of the depth of our traditions, meeting each other, but really meeting one another in the lives of actual people, where we bring people together from different paths and different journeys and learn to share intimately with each other our own experiences of the spiritual path. So a kind of interspiritual dialogue is a little different from interreligious dialogue in the sense that it's not about, you will learn about different traditions and different religions, but that's not the purpose of it necessarily. So you're really asked to kind of not be a representative of a tradition as much as speaking about your own process of transformation, how that's been inflected by a tradition or the teachings or your teachers, but then really learning from one another just about what we go through in life and what's possible for us and what we can learn from each other and how our journeys are unique. And so we all have so much to bring and to share, and not only to learn from one another, but also to teach one another just by being ourselves and expressing who we are and being committed to our own practices and our own transformation, and then constantly being willing to share that and be in dialogue and intimacy with others who may have different paths and different perspectives of all kinds. And there's always seeds of learning there.
Mm.
And so I think that Wayne was just a hallmark of that.
Mm.
With that, from everyone from the homeless people he was good friends with to the Dalai Lama and Kofi Annan, who was the head of the United Nations, and Thomas Keating, they were all, just other human beings that he was humbly on a journey with.
Mm. Mm. Thank
So I
you.
hope it's had some positive effect on me. I try to be true to it and try to do what I can to keep growing myself.
Can we get personal for a minute, Rory?
Let's do it.
So it sounds like you believe that the interspiritual movement is alive and well, that it is happening and it is growing. You said that it's everywhere. And I'm wondering if would you say something or tell a story about a time where you were in a setting with people, maybe even like a more recent one, where you were in a setting with people and people were sharing in this kind of intimate way, and it like tugged on your heart mind, or it connected with you in a way that you would maybe describe as an interspiritual experience.
Absolutely. And I mean, the first thing that pops to mind is just what we were at together with the Thomas Keating Interspiritual seminars. Jeanette and I and 10 or 11 others were all together in Vermont. And we took some time to write papers for it, but then it wasn't the papers, everyone read them, but then everyone kind of presented it, and we spent not as much time as we may have wanted to in practice, but and then shared and talked about it. And it was deeply moving for me. And I guess one of the things I'm thinking of was, it was the last paper actually that was given by Joshin Burns, Sensei Roshi, should be a Roshi, in the Zen tradition, wonderful Zen teacher. In his paper, he has a spirituality that I so deeply respect is not the right word, love, and really am in awe and wonder of, and that is different than my own. And so it's very much a street spirituality. His main practice is doing street retreats. He'll go out into a city and bring a group sometimes. Sometimes he'll just go on his own with no money. And you just live as a homeless person, as witnessing for anywhere from a week to a month. He will do this. And he doesn't take beds in shelters, so that you're not taking a bed from anyone else, but you find food and eat in shelters, and just kind of be present to the situation. So very deep practice to go along with his meditation and other things, and I have so much respect for it. And we'll probably go on one of these days, but it's also not my main practice, and I can feel in my body that it's not So just because something else is amazing and so needed in this world doesn't mean it's always our own practice. But this idea of interspiritual dialogue, where he shared his paper from there, brought up so much for me. Um, and as Jeanette knows, I was quite emotional in my response, particularly because he spoke these stories of homeless people he's become friends with, and really talked about their spirituality and insights into life that he's learned from. And myself, I have a younger brother that I was very close with. He knew Brother Wayne and was very close with Brother Wayne. And actually, the year after Brother Wayne died, he kind of spiraled downward. And over the years, we realized he had schizophrenia, which is, anyone who has had it in their lives or been around it knows how devastating it can be. And so he does live as a somewhat homeless person now, has kind of rejected the family and a lot of contact with us. But Joshin's depth of spirituality and his willingness to share it with us just brought up a lot of feelings around that. And a lot of allowed me to touch a place in myself, in being with that kind of suffering, and also not just that suffering, but the beauty and the reality of the divine life present there, that was deeply moving for me, and brought out an aspect that I don't necessarily always get to touch or be in contact with, because the ways I'm being led to try and serve right now are not in the same way. And that's not a bad thing. That's like what's so wonderful is we all have different gifts and abilities. And if we can bring those together to learn from one another, I think we have so much of a more capacious spirituality and a much more integral kind of transformative process, so that we always are continuing to become whole human beings. But that only happens as all of us become whole and we can learn from everyone, because ultimately that's where our wholeness is. It's never just encased in our own lives and journeys. So that's kind of I don't know if that's what you were going for, but and maybe you, Jeanette, too, even have some reflections on that. I feel I'm always interested as people experience it. Maybe you experienced it somewhat differently, but that's where I've seen so often the power of this kind of these kind of interspiritual communities that can come together and share like this.
Mm. Thank you for retelling that. Thank you for sharing that story. Yeah, I think that I was touched by receiving your response, and I haven't talked about this whole conversation is spontaneous for everyone who's listening now and on the recording. To receive the lived experience that was just like so spontaneous and can only arise in a spontaneous moment like it did, that touched me too. When I think about when are my experiences, some of my interspiritual experiences, no surprise because you just read my paper on nature and interspirituality, but have been in nature. Nature is a real place of connection for me. And I can remember standing in front of a frozen waterfall in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and just not being able to it was like I just was one of the most, I felt so present in that moment, like I had never felt, and so in awe. And maybe I would describe it as an experience of unity or of oneness or of togetherness or of connection.
Mm.
Friends, I want to remind you, please feel free to type any questions you might have for Rory into the chat. There is one here from Lauren, and I think we can go to that if that's all right. I'm wondering if Rory has one tradition with which he's most rooted, and then draws from other traditions as a way to complement or offer alternate lenses into what he touches into most deeply in his primary tradition? Or does he not identify with a particular tradition primarily? Thanks, Lauren, for that question. Great question.
So, yeah, thank you, Lauren, for that question. This is a wonderful question. And I want to say, possibly with a somewhat complex response. And so I'll just kind of talk, and it might be a little roundabout way, but try and get, because I think it's a really important question, and it's a question that comes up a lot, and that a lot of people think of when we talk about inner spiritual. And so maybe I'll just speak personally from my own, and then maybe at the end offer a few things on kind of inner spiritual identities, maybe that is sometimes helpful. So for me personally, I do not identify in a tradition. So I identify as inner spiritual, which is what feels right to me. In fact, I would say my journey has quite clearly, in my own discernment, led me to not claim an identity in a tradition. For probably own particular reasons of, we all have different journeys and different ways we're going to try and serve in the world. And I think there has to be a trust in life itself and how it moves and how we do that. So that being said, that does not mean in any way that I don't have a kind of rootedness in traditions, I guess you could say, but also it doesn't look like how we traditionally think about it. And so, my rootedness is first and foremost in, I would say, my daily practice, which for, 22 years now has been, a couple sessions of daily meditation would be the backbone of it. Silent meditation, really a centering prayer-based meditation. But not exactly centering prayer. There's other elements that have been present and I've practiced in other traditions, and but there's an integrating way that it's come together for me. And so the other backbone is obviously the teachers I've had and the kind of lineages I've connected with. And so, being close with Brother Wayne, very close with Thomas Keating, considering the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism is a very important influence, as well as some Zen Buddhism. In addition, I had a Hindu Advaitic spiritual father when I spent a year in India, who, we had very, very intimate, close experiences together that I can only really find descriptions of in some guru literature, sometimes in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that would actually describe it. And so all of that is just present as part of my path, obviously together with my cultural background and my family and just all the experiences I've had growing up. I grew up in Utah and, been many different walks of life is all part of it. And so I don't see myself as based in a tradition. And at the same time, I feel myself very rooted in traditions and in these lineages, but also with a backbone of practice. And I think that's just really important. It's, the danger of walking a path maybe, somewhat like mine, especially when you're younger, is you bounce around to all different things, right? And that can be okay. That's part of the search, right? And so you're bouncing around, but one can not end up developing a real rootedness in something, even if it's not a tradition, right? A rooted practice that you're going to stick with through thick and thin. Because the truth is, in my experience, if we're going to really make progress and transformation, it's not when everything's going well, it's when stuff is hitting the fan, right? And when your practice is terrible and when you don't want to do it. And when we get to those moments, if there isn't a kind of rootedness and something that we just keep going that's going to take us through, we're given all this fertilizer and grist in these difficult circumstances, but we lose the ability to actually utilize that in a way that's going to lead to a harvest down the road. So we jump to the next thing because we think, oh, this is not for me anymore. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good. And you jump to another, and we can develop what I sometimes call cookie cutter spirituality, or cookie spirituality, cookie jar spirituality. It's like we always want to keep sticking our hand back in the cookie jar, you know? And cookies are really good. They taste really good. They're wonderful. Our bodies are almost made for them, right? I mean, calories and sugar, like we love it. But if we just eat cookies all day long, we're not getting, actually, it's going to have real consequences down the road. And so if we're kind of always looking for a blissful experience or some experience of lightness or even peace, we can develop a spirituality that just keeps looking for cookies, trying to stick a hand back in the cookie jar, and that'll have consequences later. So I think this general question of traditions is a complex one, because we need rootedness and we need the traditions and the wisdom they bring. But I am not of the mindset, which, you know, many of my teachers, not my particular teachers, but that sort of era developed a kind of mantra almost, that you establish yourself in a tradition and then you reach out to other traditions from there, right? And that was their experience. So they're just teaching from their experience. And the truth was, when many of them, you know, grew up and came up through the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, you couldn't do this as much, right? The traditions weren't as close. They were just meeting each other. I mean, you know, they've always been influencing each other, but in a much more kind of embodied and in direct way, particularly in the West and particularly in the United States. And so their experience was really rooting in a tradition and reaching out. But then as they began to do more interspiritual dialogue, coming together in intimacy, they began to create a new atmosphere and new containers without even knowing it, I think, where people like me began to grow and come up. So I'm a child of all these different people and traditions. And I never had a teacher, not one, not Brother Wayne, not Dalai Lama, not Joshi Baba, who's my Hindu Advaitic teacher, not Thomas Keating, never once asked me this question or even addressed it, because it wasn't relevant. I mean, what was relevant was our relationship and my spiritual growth and our relationship and what could serve. And the idea of being in this or being in that really didn't have anything to do with it. And so that was another sign for me that this wasn't just my own kind of being a rebel or not wanting to be, but, you know, this actual journey was being supported by some of the great teachers who were very rooted in traditions. And so it gave me confidence, I think, to follow my discernment on that, and where I felt I was being called to serve and called to grow and deepen. And I say that too, to also, it's really important that it doesn't mean this is like some kind of way that is better or that replaces traditions. I have many friends and colleagues who are deeply rooted in traditions and fully support that. So it really is a question of discernment of our own journeys, which we do ultimately ourselves, but with spiritual mentors and with communities, as to, you know, where we're being called to best deepen and best serve. And that can just look like many different things. And I think that's the paradigm shift from thinking of traditions as these separate kind of containers or escalators to the top room with a nice view, as I put it in that essay. They're much more than that. And they're influencing each other all the time. And as we come more together, we're creating new ways, a new paradigm, I think, to understand what we even mean by religion and spirituality. And I think we'll see more and more people who are being grown and walking spiritual paths that are mentored by people in multiple traditions. And so where that goes and what those people end up seeing and the perspectives they bring to bear will continue to evolve our idea, I think, and just the way we approach these things. So I think a lot of that is going on right now, and that's part of the fecundity and the growth and the vibrancy of the interspiritual movement.
I have a curiosity, Rory. Is what you are talking about the manifestation of the interspiritual age that Brother Wayne talked about?
Well, I'm not going to get too grandiose. I don't want, I mean, it's good to have these big visions because I think it gives us hope and it gives us something to move forward. But also, we always want a humility that in some sense too, what we're doing is just, we're doing the best we can and we're walking our own paths and we're trying to deepen ourselves and we're trying to serve the world and serve others. And if that's where it's leading, then that's where it's leading. But it's not like this is what it is and rah rah. It's like, okay, if it's organic and it's of life and it's of the spirit and it's emerging from our Buddha nature without necessarily having to even say those are all the same things, then okay. I think, I mean, maybe we'll discover down the road it doesn't work so well. So I think that openness and that humility is an essential part of whatever wants to emerge. Because ultimately, if anything is going to really be of benefit, it comes from, not from us individually, but from that deeper part of us that is intertwined with everything and everyone and every tradition. And I do think I'm very confident that that kind of interdependence does want to emerge more consciously and in more embodied forms in the world, which I think will absolutely necessitate new experiments among religious traditions. And as they give birth to these things, we need to be very careful and very discerning and, have a lot of awareness of the difficulties. Traditions, they're there for a reason. They've for thousands of years, they've investigated, like the inner life, and they're very aware of cul-de-sacs and wrong turns that we can make. And, you know, having some discernment when you should push forward and really through, and other times when to pull back and just accept, and all of this. So there's a lot of wisdom that's, without my spiritual teachers, I would have gone down so many roads that can just take you in off directions. And this is very real, it happens. We still learn from it. And at the same time, there's something obviously emerging that's new and that's happening and can't always be put in words. And I think those are signs of a kind of paradigm shift. And I also think, for me, another big kind of light bulb is that when we look at younger generations, I tend to describe them as demanding this. I think we tend to think they're not going in traditions. They don't necessarily want to mainline traditions, and sometimes we think they're rejecting religion, but actually they really want the depths of a spiritual life. They may have immaturity in it, like we all did, whether we're in a tradition or not. It's part of being youthful and having our energy. But I think their cry, it's a very real, heartfelt impulse, and part of it is a real challenge to us and to our religious traditions to begin experimenting and thinking in a different way, without declaring it an interspiritual age or this is what's happening, but we're in it together. And we just do that more and more, and we become more intimate. We pool our discernment and we allow things to grow organically, particularly in order to serve these generations of young people who have, and not just young people, it happens all through the age, it's not just younger generations, but those who really feel called to walk a path this way and need to do is so in partnership with traditions, because that's where our wisdom is. So it's not separate or apart from them, but it's it's like we all need to move into a village together, and then we see what happens. And you still have your house and you still have, it doesn't mean it's going away, but all of a sudden we're all interacting in the village, and some people are going to fall in love and they're going to have children together, and then we got to take care of the children and we got to understand it, but we're not necessarily all in our boundaried houses anymore. And so how do we form a community of religion traditions, especially in the depths of spiritual life? So that's my sense of it.
Thank you. And that really seems to tie in with David's question too. There's this longing that many interspiritual people have, or someone on a interspiritual path. How do we find community? Where are those communities? How do we make those connections you were talking about?
Mm-hmm. So wonderful question. Thank you, David. Another question that we get a lot. And I mean, first, I think recognizing that it may be lonely for a lot of it, that there is something kind of new emerging, and there still are a lot of people in mindsets that, I mean, we have a world that does not support a spiritual journey, right? In a culture that we live in. So already just going on a spiritual journey is difficult. So you think of, being in a tradition, there's some advantages to that. But if you really feel deeply called in this more inner spiritual way, and it's a form of service to the rest of the world, then I think we have to engage it with, recognizing that we'll have to learn to explain ourselves, we'll have to hone our own journeys, continue to try and form relationships and partnerships with people and traditions, while recognizing that a lot of people, even those in the depths of a spiritual journey, might still be holding on to an older mindset, and particularly an identity that, I am this, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Christian, I am, which is very true in one sense, and in another sense can be a big obstacle. But like anything that's emerging and that's going to be good and new, it's going to take struggle, and it's going to, it's going to be lonely sometimes. And so I think even seeing that itself is a form of service to what we're trying to help birth, gives us some sustenance to continue the journey. And knowing that you're not alone, that other people are doing it, even if you're not finding the right community yet. Because that's just true. It's just true. We're seeing it more and more and more. So all that being said, as a kind of, footnote, I think we have to try and form communities, I mean, and do it in a way that makes sense for us. I mean, one of the biggest people write in all the time to our foundation, and they're so hungry for community, and they really are thinking of like living together or even a kind of commune. And, that comes with a lot of difficulties sometimes. So we want to be aware of that. But simple things like forming circles, in your neighborhood, or circles online now that we have Zoom, where you can meet once a month with others who are to just kind of check in with where you're at, share a practice, share a silent meditation, let everyone talk a bit about where their journey is. That is just part of forming community. And it's happening. It's happening all over. And I know it's difficult, and I know it's lonely. And I won't go into all these details of my own journey, but it might sound like I've had teachers, and I've been so lucky, and I'm honored and indebted to them. And at the same time, uh, in no way has that taken away from the deep experiences of loneliness and being on my own, that have been a very big part of my spiritual journey. And I'm in a state right now where that seems there is communities forming, and but that's been recent, the last 5 to 7 years, really. And so, and that may change in the future. So I think, again, we have to be open to what comes and what life wants to bring us. It always is bringing us what we need to grow, and what we need to grow in a way that will serve others in the best way possible, even if it doesn't look like it and we're not open to it. And so keep searching, keep trying, and keep trying to start little communities, and keep failing and keep succeeding in some ways. And there's little pockets of this happening everywhere, all over the country, all over the world. And we don't know exactly what it's building towards, but I very much feel confident that this is happening. And I mean, just look at where, again, 2004, Brother Wayne died. No one knew what interspiritual was. Now I see people use it all the time. I don't even know how they're using it. There's books on it. It's just everywhere. So something's percolating, and we're all contributing to it. And so staying with our practice and our transformation and trying to build these communities is actually part of the practice, I think. So I don't know if that's an answer that actually makes anyone feel better. And I don't have any easy answers for it. But I think it has to emerge organically. I think this whole movement is very organic. and we can learn from nature, as Jeanette often says, and its processes, which are sometimes destructive or sometimes amazingly vital and growthful, and other times are, the Big Bang happened and there was this tiny insta-seconds of crazy complexity and everything, and then it's like nothingness for billions of years as stuff moves. So there's also a place for those places of darkness and rest, and all of it's part of the journey. And so I think it's a little bit different from how other traditions may be formed, where you had a great leader and a great revelation, and then people were drawn to that, and it was based on their teachings, and they're trying to kind of recreate the initial experience in some ways, right? The Buddha's enlightenment, or Christ consciousness. Where this is very, it's not centered on a particular person or a particular teaching. So it's very communal in that sense. And so it just has to happen much more organically through all our efforts and everything that we're doing. And that we just keep walking forward and trusting in that the best we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oops. Jeanette, I was wondering, we've got a couple questions about the new monasticism, and I wonder if does that tie into what you are talking about here also? I mean, can you tie that in for us?
Yes, yeah. So that's also, thank you for that question. For me, certainly very much so. So the new monasticism kind of came out. Adam Bucko, who's another wonderful man, he became a good friend of mine. And we kind of talked together for like 2 years almost daily, found all these overlaps and resonances in our experience. And then we wanted to express it. And we kind of jumped on the bandwagon of this term, new monasticism, which was popular in evangelical circles, actually. And we had people like Shane Claiborne and Jonathan Hartgrove Wilson. We had a lot of respect for the work they were doing. They were moving into poor neighborhoods, left behind by empires, they called it, and they would form communities and try to serve the poor and serve the homeless and just live in this very simple way and get away from the politics and the kind of a lot of the unsavory stuff that can happen at times in some of our Christian circles in this country. Unfortunately, perhaps many of them. And it was really beautiful work, and they used this term new monasticism. And so we decided to jump in the conversation, but also a writer, Ramon Panikkar, had coined the term back in 1980 in a bit different way. And so the difference we brought in was a deeply contemplative aspect and a interspiritual aspect, that wasn't just based in one tradition. And so we used it the way Panikkar did. And so for us, new monasticism we use monasticism is really trying to name the commitment to a spiritual journey. So in its original form, monachos can mean to be set apart or alone, or and there's other ways of interpreting this, because I think, we're in much more communal times now, but really to set yourself apart from the convenient culture that surrounds you. And then, the type of dedication that comes with being a monk, it's a whole life dedication, right? You're giving up your everything to be in a monastery, and everything is about the spiritual path and your transformation in theory. In practice, that's not always the case. But so we used it as a term to represent that same level of experience, of commitment. And the new part was then trying to do it in a new way. And this was what Panikkar talked about. That was one way of trying to work out a full commitment to a transformative journey. And then we were trying to do it in the world, having relationships, figuring out financial, issues, which is a big concern for this. I mean, you have to have right livelihood. You ultimately have to be following your discernment, and everything in your life has to come out of your spiritual journey. So you don't get the option of saying, oh, I just really need this money, so I'm going to take this job and do this. You actually have to make the decision out of here. And sometimes that might be, yes, take the job, but I don't want to do it. Other times it might be, don't take the job. And it's like, well, I have no idea how I'm going to survive, but you have to trust it. So that kind of commitment is one part of the term. And then the other part is really looking at the practices and the wisdom that's grown out of not only monastic traditions, but traditions like Sufism and Hasidic rabbis, and how do we take these practices and I don't evolve is not quite the right word, but how do we hold them and reinvigorate them in a way that they can serve our lives in the world? Because they really were, they're amazing techniques and practices. They were also developed to be done by monks, a lot of them 24/7, or if you're a Hasidic rabbi, you get to hang out in your synagogue and study all day. And these aren't the lives that many of us. So how can we extract these and put them into forms and get the kernels of them so that they're working in our daily lives that we live today in the world? So it really is how to take this full commitment to a transformative journey and figuring out ways together to live that out in the world with all the complexities and difficulties that come with that. And also to say, almost all of these practices and techniques and our traditions, and I think this is really important, and is, without a doubt, have all the languages, all of it have been formulated almost exclusively by men, right? And so half of the human family has been generally kept out of that. I mean, even when you had, nuns, and you have amazing women, spiritual masters, but still the language they had to use, the practices they had to use was all developed by men for the most part. And so there is something missing, and so I also think part of the interspiritual movement, part of the new monasticism is also keeping an eye to being able for everyone in whatever way they are to bring forth their full experience of the world and help us learn and understand and formulate languages and practices that are able to express that. And that's going to change how we're understanding all these concepts like God or Buddha nature and our practices, and even discipline and all these kinds of words. So we have to be very open and organic. It's not like there's not good stuff there, but we recognize all the stuff that's missing, which I just think is essential to the time that we're in now. And that's also part of the practice of a new monastic, because we're in the world and we don't get to live with 100 other people that all believe the same we do and all practice the same we do and all have the same ideas of what spiritual enlightenment looks like and what we're all heading towards. No, we're living amongst great diversity of racial, cultural, sexual, gender, religious diversity, and all of this is bringing has very important insights for our human family that I don't think that's, if there's an interspiritual age, it's coming to a point where we can celebrate and express and support all these many different expressions of spirituality.
Rory, I am really appreciating all of this conversation and the questions from everybody. We have maybe one more question, and then I'll ask a question, and then if you have any closing thoughts or words that you'd like to share. But one thing that I was just at the Spiritual Directors International Conference in Santa Fe, and we were talking about interspirituality, and I think we could also include new monasticism and the diversities within, or the lack of. And I would love to hear, I don't hear about diversity within class. Is what we're talking about for affluent people, is what we're talking about for a kind of educated person? Is it for, on whose terms? When we're talking about saying, let's take a practice here and do this, and, being careful, of course, all about misappropriation and the discernment there. This is just something that I struggle with. Like, is it, and then a related question is, does it work? Does it serve people who don't have the option of having a choice to be an interspiritual person?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I have any great wisdom on this topic. I think, and part of that is my own life, which, has certainly not been lived in affluence. I lived paycheck to paycheck most of my life and as a single father. And some of that has changed in the last year. Well, is changing, I should say, hasn't quite changed, but is changing. And I haven't been someone whose spirituality has been called to work in that kind of street spirituality that I mentioned that Joshin had and that Adam Bucko had, which is one of the reasons I'm so grateful for their example, and why my relationships and learning from them feels so important. And then, the only thing I can think of is really two things. One, I think, which one do I want to? So one, I think holding this question without having the answer to it and not letting it go, keeping it with us, it brings a certain sadness into, our journeys, without letting it affect our confidence necessarily in the journey itself, but not letting go of this question. Because I think the question itself and how to work with it and how to address it is actually itself a spiral that deepens. It's a doorway into the depths of a spiritual journey, which does serve all of life. And I guess that's the second part, that I really do believe that in some sense, we don't have the answers to these problems. I mean, humanity is a mess, right? And has always been a mess, or at least, for a long, long, long time. way back when, maybe we don't know for sure, maybe, but it's a mess now. And we have to live with people who have no interest in spirituality and no interest in changing. And they can also be really good people. They might be very limited in their thinking. They might operate in ways politically that are very destructive and full of suffering for others, and also can be good people at the same time. How do we hold that? That we don't have the answers to fix it. But I think life itself, the divine, Buddha nature, it does. It wants this for everyone and everything. And I guess I have a deep trust that that when we are doing the best ourselves, that by as we come into deeper forms of transformation, we are able to serve others in the best way possible. That looks very different for different people. And we have to trust that in where we're called, where life itself is guiding us, is actually where we can best serve and help ameliorate these problems and the suffering. And I think for some people that's really a calling directly to work with, the least among us. But for all of us, it is to always hold that question and the heartbreak of it, and the helplessness of it, and the humbleness that it induces, is a very important practice that we can't get away from. And so I, just a very heartfelt gratitude to you, Jeanette, for asking that question, and for in your own journey not staying so close to it, because it's affecting me, it's teaching me right now. And so, and I may fail in that from time to time, or a lot. And so we need all of this, and to keep bringing it forward, even if we don't have the answers for it.
So we put a comma. We put a comma at the end, right?
Yeah, I don't have, I just,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know Thomas Keating struggled with this some, and held it. And, sometimes when he was talking with Adam, I mean, because he was a monk, you live in very low means, but also you're supported. You got food, you have shelter,
Yeah.
and you're living in a monastery. But he really saw his place as developing the contemplative wisdom of the human family, but felt a real heartbreak. And um, I can't think of the right word. Um, respect, and almost a sadness that it wasn't his own path for someone like Adam, who was working so closely with people on the bottom. So I think that's always there, and at the same time saying that, and this can get a little, I might be off here, but everyone, no matter where they're at, no matter how much oppression or suffering or poverty or difficulty, at the same time, I think we have to grant them the full integrity of their humanity, which also means there always is a choice. And that we always have the ability to work with the circumstances of our own lives, whatever they are, to grow. And those circumstances may be widely different, but a choice to continue growing in compassion and love and wisdom, no matter where you're at, I think is part of granting the full humanity to everyone. And so there's a certain kind of dignity in that, I think, that when we, this sometimes can be lost when we only see the suffering.
Yeah, I thank you for just you always bring the heartfelt answer with such a sharp mind. And it has been something that I would to strive for in myself as well, to have. I think the tension in this is like, what about people who are forced to convert to a certain religion? I think my ultimate dream would be to work with people so that we're all telling stories from our lived experiences about our interspiritual experiences, and to hear it, firsthand. I think that would be quite cool, really powerful. A lot of folks here are doing that very thing. Like, they're people who are working in group spiritual companionship and one-on-one spiritual companionship, and whether it's in a traditional, non-traditional way, probably mostly, non-traditional, quite honestly. So, wondering if you have any closing question or words or thoughts to folks who are on this journey and also pursuing growth and going into the spiral deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously just a thankfulness for this space and to be able to do this and the work that you're doing and all of you are doing with the spiritual directors and just everyone doing this work. I think that's it just really have confidence or develop confidence that your own journey is contributing and it's helping, even if you can't see it and even if you don't know it. So I think you hit it on the nail, Jeanette. I think Jeanette, sorry. It's a commitment to our journeys and whatever that means, and continually deepening and having confidence in that, and then being able to bring that together in intimacy with others and with the diversity of experiences that are happening, and knowing that when we do this, something is happening. New insights are being born, new possibilities are born. And even if it looks like a tiny little community or it's just one other person, this stuff goes out there. It's out there, and then other people can pick up on it, and other people it will feel more natural for. And so the struggles we go through are building roadways for others. new possibilities. And we have to have that kind of confidence with our journey, because ultimately it's the only thing that's going to get us through. And it's true. That's why it gets us through, because it's reality and it is helping. And so, know that and use that to help commit deeper to yourself, and then to a willingness to create these circles of intimacy and sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rory.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so
guys.
much for being with us. And thank you to all of you who were with us live, and for your great questions, and for all of you who might view the video later. Don't hesitate to contact us for further questions or to share your thoughts, and the same with Rory. We will have his information available here for you all. So thank you, and many blessings for our individual and collective journeys as we go forward. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.